Welcome to the CineHustle Podcast. This is Vin Chandra, your host, and today we're going to talk about how to lose $70,000 making a film. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. This is Vin Chandra here with the CineHustle Podcast. Today I have with me a very special guest, Dave Horowitz. Dave is responsible for the biggest moments of my career, from shaking hands with Prime Minister Trudeau to flying to Japan to film for The Economist or to film for large companies like Citigroup. So Dave, thank you for being here, my man.
How you doing, Vin? Thanks for having me on.
Also with me today is Josh, the audio engineer. How you doing, Josh?
Hey, guys.
Now, the reason I wanted to have Dave on is, he may not be a household name, but he's a cine-hustler. And Dave is a commercial and corporate filmmaker, producer, editor, director, and cinematographer. So he does it all. He works in Santa Monica, so he's near Hollywood, but he's not in the Hollywood bubble. And, Dave, the reason I brought Dave on today is because Dave once made a movie. And that movie cost about $70,000. This was back in '96. And having a $70,000 film, for me, for example, having a $70,000 budget would be life-changing as I go forward in making the film that I'm about to make. But today we're going to talk about what happens when you make a film, you spend all this money, you go through finishing it, completing it, and it falls flat. And so I know it's a very, Dave's giving me this kind of look like, oh shit, what did I get myself into?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Welcome, you fucking failure.
Right. No. So too many people talk about that one success story that that inspires everybody. But you know what? We're being practical here, and we want to talk about the real chance that your film will fail.
Well, actually, sometimes you learn more in failure than you do in success.
Right.
The definition of insanity obviously is making the same mistake over and over again and thinking you're going to get change. So if my example in failure can help somebody, that's great. But I know that, if I ever do make a feature again, which I plan on doing it sometime in my life, now that I know how difficult it is to make one, I think ignorance is bliss on your first one because you don't realize how difficult it is in completing it. Once you do complete it and you have the hindsight to look back 2020, things are a little bit different. But that being said, there were a lot of mistakes from the get-go when I made this film back in '96. And '96 was a completely different era. Now, obviously, the advent of, digital video, making it look like film. Back in the '90s, this was the golden age of independent cinema. Brothers McMullen had just come out, Clerks had come out. So there was a lot of success, and I saw these independent filmmakers make it overnight, and you think, oh, why can't that be me? So it was inspiring to hear these stories of Ed Burns and
Robert
Kevin
Rodriguez,
Smith and
Kevin
Robert
Smith,
Rodriguez,
yeah.
exactly. So I forged ahead and met a producer locally. I was living in Rochester at the time, and I had just graduated college. And you kind of write what you know, right? So
which is what you're told.
Exactly.
When you're starting off the screenwriting process, you're like, yeah, write what you know.
Exactly. Because this is my first time writing a feature, and I figured I'd write something that I knew, and that was, I didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So the story kind of centers on 3 college students, or almost on the verge of graduation, wondering what they're going to do with their lives. Mm-hmm. Kind of in the vein of Reality Bites and definitely inspired by Clerks.
And you wrote this.
And I wrote it because, there was no way I could afford to pay a writer to write a script. You had to do it on your own. I mean, even nowadays, it's really hard to hire a writer to write your own story that you'd like to
exactly
do.
Well, see, that's a problem I encountered, and that's really good because I like to see, for example, with the film that's coming up in Fiji, which interestingly enough Dave will be working on too with me, and I'm glad to obviously be able to have your wisdom behind this too. is that I am paying somebody to write it, and they're not cheap. I mean, it's going to end up costing several $1,000s just to get something in writing. And it may not even be the script that you want. I mean, sure, you can guide them, and, we'll be talking more about like the writing process, in future episodes. But yeah, that's kind of one of the things and that's something you said.
Well, yeah, that's that. And we wanted to get to the points of where I failed. And I think one of the first things that I could look back on honestly and say where I failed was you're only as strong as your screenplay.
Right.
Your screenplay has got to be great. It's got to be great because there are going to be so many variables going into production, whether it's challenges with an actor or challenges with location, or you only have a certain number of days for this person or that person. There's always going to be adversity that you deal with on set. So you want to have the best possible script going in because you're going to inevitably face so many challenges that will weaken possibly your process of making the story you want to tell. So one of the things that you realize when you make stuff and you look in the mirror is you say, what am I really good at and what am I really bad at? Right. And it's about kind of partnering up with people who are good at the things that you're bad at. Exactly. And one of the things that I realized I possibly might not be very good at the time was a screenwriter. And so I think right from the get-go, I was destined for failure because my screenplay wasn't as good as it could have been. I was so jonesing to make this film within a year after I graduated that I might have been able to spend some more time polishing it up and making it better. And maybe that could have been the difference between, maybe it being somewhat of a success and a complete failure that it was.
How did the production come about? So, I mean, you have this idea, you wanted to make a film. How did you, because that's the thing, like, a lot of, even though the times have changed in terms of technology, I think I think the process of getting a film made is essentially the same. And you talk about, I mean, writing the script is the first thing. If you don't have a good story, you don't have a good film. I mean, you can have a good idea in your head, but it's not going to equate to something great on screen. I mean, I just look at so many films now. I mean, you look at some of these big Hollywood tentpole films, and half of them are just shitty films.
Totally.
More than half of them, actually. Like, so many of them are just like run by the numbers. Typical cliched stories, and it's almost insulting to the intelligence.
Well, I got very lucky because when I graduated college, I didn't study anything with filmmaking, but I made films when I was younger, right. Like crappy little home videos. And I think you actually learn a lot on those, on what works and what doesn't, as Robert Rodriguez said it in his guerrilla filmmaking book, that everyone has at least 10 bad movies in them. Right. It's a matter of getting those out and exercising those out and, getting better at your craft. Because the only way you're going to get better is practice. Right. But so when I graduated, I went to the New York Film Academy and learned the technicalities of filmmaking. And this was back in the era when you actually had to develop film, like we talked about. And then I had this idea I was inspired, so I wanted to make a feature. And I came back to Rochester, New York, and I met this filmmaker who had basically done the same thing I did 2 years earlier. And he got a distribution deal. And with that money that he got from the distribution deal, he looked at me and said, wow, that was me 3 years ago when I wanted to make a film. He was a fireman in Rochester, and he was, I think, inspired by my ambition. And, I was 23 at the time, dumb kid, just my goal was just to make this movie. I was armed with a screenplay, and he basically, he gave me the tools to step by step almost to basically proceed in getting it to production. So not only did he contribute a good majority of the production money, he helped me start an LLC. He helped me on the business side of things, where I had to do the producing side, which was raising money. and then, get locations and cast it. And, it was all do it yourself.
Which hasn't changed in 20 odd years.
20, which hasn't changed
24
at all.
years, right?
I mean, the biggest difference, honestly, with Niche, the film that I made, was we didn't even know if we were so poor. We only had $25,000 to finish the production. We didn't even know if the film had come out because we were filming on recan film stock. And what that basically means is these commercial houses would sell the film back to the film stores, and they would sell it to discounted independent filmmakers like me who would buy it on pennies on the dollar because that was what was on our budget.
Right.
And we didn't know if we were shooting with exposed film or not. And we didn't have enough money for dailies. So it was only until 2 weeks after production wrapped, 18 days of production, 2 weeks later, we find out that all the footage came out. We were lucky.
Right.
None of it was exposed. None of it was bad. But,
it's funny. It's funny, like, because I just saw the perfect illustration of how you must have felt, because as soon as you said that you were using reused film stock, I saw Josh over there just grab his head going, he had the holy shit look in his face.
That's so fucking crazy.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is that you, like, I didn't even know that was a thing you could do. I mean, because I studied film in my early college days too, but we shot everything on video because we were even poorer, right?
Right.
But I didn't even know you could buy potentially exposed film stock and stick it in a camera, and I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah,
That's
and
crazy.
that was one of the lessons that was imparted to me from this producer was, him saying, "Listen, this is our budget. We don't have enough money to buy full 1,000-foot reel 35 millimeter film. We need to buy, it's going to put the AC out of commission because he's going to constantly have to reload the film and just change it all the time. But we need to make that sacrifice because we're going to spend less money getting recan film stock from these houses that sell at pennies on the dollar, but it's only 200 feet long instead of 1,000. So our AC was worked to the bone, and our AC was, and my good friend Nick, who is my AD on the film, could attest to this. He was a complete psycho, but we were able to survive with him even being psychotic.
How much of your budget was like film stock?
Well, this was 1996, so me being a little more senile and having done a little more drugs, my memory isn't completely solid. Okay. It's a little fuzzy, but if I were to guess, it would have probably been, a third of our budget. A third of our budget went to the film. 35 millimeter was not cheap. And then, the DP was expensive. Getting a DP, this guy was from Brooklyn. So we had to put him up. We had to put up his AC. So the crew cost some money, but the crew was just basically the DP, a grip,
right?
Maybe a couple PAs who did it for free. We had a script supervisor who he trained on the spot, who I'm still friends with today.
Okay.
And we paid a sound guy as well, but all in the can was $25K.
Wow.
And at one time, I remember we had finished, it was an 18-day shoot. And at one time we were, I think 12 days in, and we had run out of money, and we were somehow, I don't know how we got it. I think maybe John, who was the producer who I met, somehow was able to get a distribution check sent to him up front, wired the next day, and we were able to not cancel the production. But it was a close call. I remember once.
That's crazy to think that 1/3 of your budget would have been film stock. Now it's like, you need hard drives or CFast cards or,
Exactly. And that's where I think we come to another area of where it might have failed. Was if it was the digital era of filmmaking, maybe we took more takes of this or that.
Right.
Maybe we got better performances from the actors, or maybe we shot it in a more highly kinetic action way where it generated more interest or it lended to the comedic style.
Right.
Like I was limited because we were on such a tight schedule with 18 days and every day time was money. Even plugging into the apartment where we basically shot the main area of the set was where I lived.
Right.
So, plugging in these huge lights, my electricity bill was huge at the end of the month.
Right.
So even doing that, we had to factor that into the budget.
Dude, I feel like filmmakers, sorry to cut it on you there.
Oh, no.
I feel like filmmakers now are so freaking spoiled.
Yeah.
And I mean, I never used any film. I started 7-8 years ago, and I remember when I started, I had like an RE 650 watt tungsten Fresnel light, that would like blow a circuit at my house or something.
Right.
And now, not even a decade later, we have these LEDs that are battery powered.
Right.
And
exactly.
it's like, could you imagine back like 23 years ago, 24 years ago when you shot this, that like the amount of crap having to go through, it's like it's almost easier to make it's easier to make a film. I'm not saying it's almost easier.
I think back in 96 you almost had to be more decisive.
Right.
From just not only picking your shots because you only had a limited amount of film and a limited amount of time, but also just with if you were editing even on, I mean, this doesn't apply to my film because we actually edited it on an Avid, but
okay.
On a Steenbeck, you had to be totally precise on what edits, kind of trust your instinct, because you couldn't just continually cut the film like you can with an Avid or Premiere or whatever. So I think back then you almost had to trust your instinct more than you do now. Now it's like, we could try it this way, we could try it that way.
Right.
Let's try it on all these different takes because, it's digital filmmaking. You could shoot it however many ways you want or take as many takes as you want.
So let's contrast that with some of the projects, because Dave himself is a commercial filmmaker. If you followed those Doritos Crash the Super Bowl commercials or Crash the Super Bowl contest that the Doritos had over the last several years, Dave produced one of it was called the Lemonade Stand, which was out of 20,000 entrants, it was the top 10 finalists or the top 5 finalists, one of the top 10. Top 10. And so Dave and the director Nick got to go to the Super Bowl. You and Rich as well, right? Richard, did he get to go?
Richard wrote it.
Okay, Richard was the
he
writer,
didn't get to go.
Oh, okay, so it was Nick and Dave.
Only two of us. Someone had to be left out.
Yeah, right. So the writer got left out.
Richard took one for the team.
So Nick and Dave, director and producer, went to the Super Bowl, and they honestly like people like Shaq and Craig Robinson had tweeted about you guys, right? I know Craig,
we tried to use every avenue possible.
But I'm saying Shaq was a student of Nick's, and Craig Robinson, he just liked it and he put it out. It was just crazy to see. And I mean, even on YouTube now, it's like 5 million views, what I'm saying. So compare that, this is something, I know it's a little commercial, and your commercial career has been pretty good, especially for cine hustlers. I mean, the budgets that you guys are getting are way beyond anything, for example, that I would get for something that I would do here in Sacramento. I mean, granted, it's LA, but when you compare everything that you're doing now to what you did on Niche, I know obviously with experience and age comes wisdom. And I'm not saying you're old, but I'm just saying you've had way more experience now.
Right.
But what things would you have done besides the digital thing?
Well, here's the thing. I think actually being a self-promoter is almost more important and akin to sex, to success. Sorry. Yes, to sex as well.
That took a weird fucking turn.
Dude, bro, that would be a great opener.
Yeah, I was like, what the fuck? What?
A kid to sex. I'm like, whoa.
I was like, all right.
What's on your mind, man?
Dave is also a pornographic actor, a pornographic producer.
Right. Well, I did do Topless Academy. So.
Oh, yeah. So we'll talk about Topless Academy. You got to.
But yeah, I think being a self-promoter is super important. I think it's more important than almost having talent, because I've seen far more people make it as self-promoters, self-marketeers, with less talent than. Not to say that I think I am not talented in the directing category or the screenwriting category. at all in that sense. I'm just saying that I think if I had any sort of networking capability where I actually was not shy and I didn't shy away from, talking myself up and kind of being, bombastic and being the life of the party, that sort of thing. I think that goes a long way to success in this business, because you've got to be a self-promoter.
Right.
And, there are so many talented people out there who are shy, who I don't think will ever make it, because it's imperative to have that sort of self-marketing ability to make it. And, there's so many examples out there of people, filmmakers who in the 90s, I think, had, not so much talent, and they went far because they were good talkers. They were good networkers.
Michael Bay.
Well, he's good at what he does.
Really? Like,
I mean,
making flashy.
I love The Rock, but
Right,
but I
he-
hated Underground 6 or whatever that. Film
Oh, the Six Underground. Yeah, the
Terrible.
stupid Netflix
God.
film.
Wait, is that the one that just came out?
Yeah, with Ryan
God,
Reynolds.
that was a fucking
so
pile
bad.
of shit, wasn't
I
it?
had a headache after 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was like,
I didn't know what was happening.
I thought I was
still-
going to have a fucking seizure.
Seriously.
Yeah, it
Seriously.
was fucking awful.
It was just like, let's blow something up, and then let's cut to a shaky close up of
Totally.
it was-
Ryan Reynolds, be yourself.
Right,
And it was like,
right.
ugh.
Just relentless.
Let's talk about some of the actors on Niche, and what do you feel like? Because I watched it the other day just to kind of refresh my memory. I'd seen it a while back.
Sorry, my condolences.
No. But
Yeah?
I think what would have really set your film, or at least Niche, apart would have been a better talent pool in terms of acting.
Yeah, and that was one of the challenges, was being in Rochester, New York, and not having a casting director, for
Right.
example. I had the Rochester film office behind me, but there's only so much they could do. And it's exciting back then when you'd make a movie, making a feature film in small town of Rochester, people got excited.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like finding a needle in a haystack to really find a really good quality actor. Now, at the same time, maybe some of these actors were more talented than how they were reflected in my film.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things that I looked back in the mirror and saw myself as, I'm not a good director in the sense of talking to actors. So I think maybe with a better director, as far as someone who understands the craft of acting, maybe could have gotten better performances out of the actors.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably was another, reason of why the film failed.
When you finish the movie, it was in the can, or when it's edited and ready to go out to the world. What was the trajectory for it then? Like what happened after?
Well, I had a film agent in LA. It was funny because the only guy who would really take a look at it was this 75-year-old man. And if you watch the film, it's like, how would a 75-year-old man connect with this film?
Relate.
There's no way.
Bunch of
like
stoners.
it's a bunch of F-bombs in the film, stoners,
One of the characters, why am I forgetting his name now? It's like, so what's the guy with the python?
Oh, Chris.
Yeah. So Chris, he like literally carries a python around with him everywhere. And I just thought, at first I was like, is that a real python? I mean, is that a fake one? Because it wasn't moving at first. And then I see the other shot, it's like totally slithering.
Oh,
like,
no, that was a real one.
It wasn't yours, was it?
No, it was a friend of his, I think.
Right.
And, we got favors from everyone. With the Basset Hound in it was actually, it's funny, is he's a famous rock star. Lou Graham's Basset Hound. We got Lou Graham's Basset Hound to be in that film.
Wow.
That's a random one. But yeah, what were we talking about? We were talking about
Sorry, I did kind of.
I actually, can I jump in with a question?
Yeah.
I'm really curious, when you filmed the whole fucking thing. Like, when did you know? When was the moment when you were like, this fucking bombed?
Actually, at the premiere. So we had this awesome, like, big premiere at this movie theater in downtown Rochester. 400 people. I think the capacity of this theater was about 400 people. So it was packed. My parents came into town. My sister was there, all the cast and crew. And, I watched it and I kind of already knew, through the editing process, I kind of knew that, there are some scenes in here that are kind of funny. You're your own worst critic. I know you like it better than I do, but
maybe I just like you and I know you made something.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is.
You're biased, but yeah. And then most of it, I'm like, Jesus Christ! It's almost like I was sweating when I was watching it, just because I was so nervous. And there were parts when it was supposed to be funny and it was silent, and that's when I knew. Yeah, there's more silent parts than laughter. And, there isn't even unintentional laughter, which sometimes might be a good thing. Like if you watch the movie Dolomite, unintentional laughter works a lot. So it wasn't eye-opening because I kind of expected it, but I kind of dreaded those screenings where I had to be there. And granted, I'd seen the film so many times, so I was already jaded, but those were pretty indicative of what was to come.
Wow. Earlier when we talked about this, you mentioned that there was some sort of distribution in place.
Yeah. So there was that's what we were talking about. So this 70-year-old was the film's agent. Mm-hmm. And so this guy was completely out of touch with the film. But he was able, we got rejected from this. We started with all the big ones at the time, Fine Line Cinema, I think at the time, Miramax, blah, 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 blah. Fine Line was their boutique distributor, I believe, at the time. But there were like, I had a list of like 30 of them to apply to, and none of them, said yes. But this guy, Stanley Chase, I'm sure he's probably passed away by now. God bless him. But he found a distributor who distributed across college campuses. And so our film got, it was a perfect venue for that, because it's basically about finding your niche. And the company went out of business about 3 screenings in. So we never even got a return on any of the investment, obviously.
Was Niche their only film?
I don't know. And I don't remember, honestly.
They got bankrupt because of Niche.
Yeah. Yeah, they got bankrupt just buying that for pennies on the dollar.
You destroyed a company.
Right, yes.
How to destroy a company with your film. And how was your relationship afterwards with your financiers? Because that's kind of something that, right now, and I like to relate this because as an experience, so as a producer right now trying to raise money for my film, I've got about 30,000 raised. I'm putting in 10,000 of my own dollars, and I've got another, I've got about 50,000 total pledged, and that's even before I even throw any of what I've already invested, like gear and writing and all that stuff. And, because a lot of money that's coming out of pocket right now is like the writing process, which is something that, I want to make sure we have a good story, which is your first point.
Right.
Without a good story, your film's going to suck. So how is that conversation like with the people that dropped their money on you?
Oh, they were ready to reinvest right away.
Really?
No, that dried up as quickly as you could say, see ya. Right. You're only as good as your track record, right? So I was 0 for 1, and all those avenues, I already had another script lined up.
Right.
Ready to go. And unfortunately, like the producer who was kind of my mentor, who probably was involved with, I would say a third, maybe a half of the financing of the movie, obviously that was never going to happen again. We're still on good terms, but business is business.
Right.
If you're not going to get any return on your investment, why would he reinvest in me?
Right. So,
that's the price you pay when you do these things. At the time, for me, if I were to do it over again, I would do it.
Yeah.
If I had the chance to do it over again, I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
There would be several things I would do differently. Like I alluded to earlier, I would definitely polish the script more.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows, maybe, I mean, ideally I would have loved to have waited 15 years with
Right.
digital filmmaking equipment available, but I would definitely would have loved to have either, because it's not my personality to be a self-promoter.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I was destined to fail from the get-go. Maybe I could have hired an agent
Right.
for me.
It's almost like we're our own agents. And
Totally. And it's kind of an oxymoron if I say I'd love to hire an agent, well, you better have fucking talent, because there's going to be no agent going to bat for you unless you have talent.
right. I mean, do you currently have an agent right now, or?
No.
And is that something like, what would you recommend for people?
I would only recommend that if you're not a good self-promoter.
Right.
Like filmmaking has changed a lot, with the advent of technology. You can easily just, shoot a film yourself with no excuses. Like you don't even really have to have a budget.
Right.
And you couldn't have done that in the 90s. You couldn't have. So that being said, if you have a really good film from that, you might not even need an agent. I mean, as long as you just show that around to the right people. Now, back in the 90s, I would say that challenge is much more difficult, and also it is more difficult to get an agent because of the fact that technology wasn't. You couldn't get your name out there as well as you could.
There was really no way for people to see your work.
Right.
One of the perfect examples I love to put out there is David Sandberg. He's the director of Shazam, and he started off as a YouTuber. And all he did was this a 5-minute horror short or something. It was a horror short, and called Lights Out. And then James Wan's a production company saw him, saw the short, and they made a feature out of it. Gave him $10 million to make a feature. And this is some guy from Sweden,
right?
And I mean, he's done really well. I mean, he's obviously he did great stuff online.
Exactly.
For people to see. Yeah.
I mean, same thing with this guy named Joe Nussbaum. He was a filmmaker who made this parody called Lucas in Love. It was a parody on George Lucas, but Shakespeare in Love. And he got his start by doing that. He shot it on film. This was back in the late 90s. But he got an agent because I was working at the agency at the time that they signed this guy. They got a hold of this guy's short, and they were like, oh my God, we got to sign this guy. And he went on to do several commercials, and he did a couple features, but I would be curious what happened to him. But that's a perfect example of someone who kind of makes something, small, but makes it very well and has the means to get it out, and is successful with it with an agent, securing an agent.
So what's next for you? You're still doing your corporate work with Hollywood Trip Flicks and all that stuff, commercial stuff. What's next? Is there ever going to be a produced by Dave Horowitz feature?
Yes. Before I die, there will be another feature. There's one in particular the one that I'm working with on you.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get that up to speed.
Right.
As far as the writing aspect goes. And then once that's great, it's got to be great.
Yeah, exactly.
Then we'll move forward.
Well, that's the funny thing that's holding us up right now. And I mean, part of this podcast is going to be our track, or is going to be a journal of how we make that film. And one of the things that is like, I literally have the infrastructure set up to make that film. Right? We have everything set. People are ready to get on board.
Right.
But
the missing piece is
the script. And we don't want to, actually, we had projected that we were going to shoot this in February. I've pushed it back to June, just because I want to make sure that if we don't have a script now, I'm not going out there. Like, we're shooting in Fiji, and a lot of that is basically, I've got locations that are willing to let me use their locations. I've got people that are, I've got teams that are going to provide us gear and stuff like that. Everyone is set and ready to go. And obviously, there are people out there that are like, hey, sure, I've seen the team you're putting together. Like we're willing to throw some money down. Now, and this is why I wanted to have you on, is because even with the money down, I mean, we can make this film for 50,000. My goal is to get about 100, which is almost equivalent to what you had for Niche if you take into account inflation.
Right.
I would love to have that budget. But at the same time, I'm also scared that if I get everybody's money involved and we screw up and this film is a bomb, and this is the fear of every filmmaker.
Right.
It's like, how do you turn around and face those people, and what do you say? And that's where, that's my biggest performance anxiety right now. It's because like, I can, I find myself a good self-promoter, and I mean, I feel like, okay, well, I can promote the shit out of myself. And, I just don't want to be the person who farts but doesn't have any shit to back it up.
Right. Well, I would say don't be scared about the possibility of failure. Be excited about the possibility of success. And just think optimistically. I mean, don't think you're already probably pigeonholing yourself into a corner by saying, oh my God, what happens if I fail?
Right.
How do I look at these investors in the face? And, what am I going to do?
Right.
I would say listen to people like me who've made a feature before and have failed.
Mm-hmm.
And the two biggest things that I can impart to you are the script and making sure that the acting, you find good actors.
Right.
And that you find a good director, and it sounds like you have, because you're going to hire your cousin.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's not nepotism, please.
Yes.
Believe me.
But yeah, I mean, those are the two biggest things, I think. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not going to make this film unless it's a great script.
Well, see, this is kind of one of the things that I want to tell, and this is something that I learned from you and Nick. So Nick, just a little history. I met Dave through Nick, and Nick is my cousin. Dave and I really only started working a couple of years back, and I attribute my current career to Dave, because almost from meeting and filming Prime Minister Trudeau to traveling through Japan to the biggest hits in my career have been because of Dave. Because Dave called me up one time and introduced me to a fellow filmmaker that he works with. It made it.
Hey, all I did was introduce you.
Right. Well, you were my unofficial agent.
You proved them.
Oh, thank you.
You proved it by delivering time and time again. So.
Oh, thank you, man. But you're
you, dude.
So I consider Dave my unofficial agent. So if you're one of the things that I can share with people, if you want to, I have to say I have a relatively successful career. I have a roof over my head, which I can pay for, and I work on my own schedule. I live pretty freely and I live pretty happily. And so that's one of the beauties about being in this career. So I attribute that to having, an excellent agent, somebody who's kind of in touch with the clients and believes in you. And that's what, I consider Dave my unofficial agent. I think we may have to work out a deal to like start getting him more referral fees and stuff like that, So, but yeah, it's, I mean, you believed in me all the way through, and I totally thank you for that. Which is why I was like, I gotta have this guy on, and but I mean,
like just sitting here, when you look at, I've never seen Niche. I didn't know if obviously I didn't know it existed before today.
It's only into.
I'm definitely gonna look it up. I really want to see it now.
You won't find it.
Okay.
I can send it to you.
Here's my question though, and this is what I'm really curious about is like, so cult classics, right? So you see something like The Room. It's a fucking horrible movie. It's so bad. Yet it's good because it's so bad.
Right.
And it got greenlit to be they made a movie about how shitty that movie is with really good actors.
Right.
Like that's how bad it is, right? So what do you think is the difference between something like The Room and something like Niche? What fucking makes people like one bad film but not be able to see the beauty in another bad film?
I think there are two types of bad, I think. Bad where it's funny bad, and bad where it's boring bad. And you don't want boring bad because that doesn't elicit any reaction.
Right.
Whereas at least with funny bad, you're getting a reaction regardless of whether it was intentional or not.
So there's some entertainment value.
Exactly.
Got
Exactly.
it.
I almost felt, and this is maybe a critical. I hate being critical of you, and I think that's why I like
No,
this
that's
one.
that's what I think a filmmaker to a filmmaker should do, and I think it's a disservice when they don't. Is be honest. Like that's what it's all about. Like you don't want to hear
Right.
some person, just telling them what they want to hear.
Like that pool scene where, he's reading a book and has got his glasses on.
Right.
And, he's like, oh, I'm using this to, like to hide the fact that I'm checking out all the girls,
Right.
I mean, I just felt like they were technically there, considering the limitations you had at the time.
Right.
But they just weren't performed.
Right.
And if I were to say, like, I think that, like,
what do you mean? Like the set piece didn't translate to the setting didn't translate to.
No,
like,
I just think they weren't performed well. Like, I mean, the
Right.
the
Oh, yeah,
actors
that
weren't.
goes without a-
Yeah, I mean, it just
But
really.
that's-
I think if you want something comedic,
totally. And that's the thing. Comedy
Right.
is all about timing.
I
right?
mean, yeah,
And I think a lot of their performances is on me because I wasn't speaking their language. I didn't direct them to be in their characters. I'm not an actor's director.
right.
And that was a big problem with the film.
Who edited that film? Did you edit it?
I edited it along with a couple other people.
Do you think that like editing is the comedic timing is also a product of editing?
Yes, but remember we talked about recan film stock, so
right.
many different angles. This wasn't the digital era where we could film it so many different ways.
Right.
We had sometimes one take. We had at one time, I think there was a scene where, I don't know if you remember, where goes around the characters fighting Bunkley and his girlfriend.
Right.
And it's kind of a dizzying camera angle where it just goes around them. We only had that one take, and that's a 3-minute long scene. So imagine if, sure, the performances might not have been great.
Right.
That was my only option.
Right. Exactly.
We could have gotten maybe a little creative with the editing, but it's tough when your shooting ratio is 3-1. We only had, I think, in total about 300 minutes worth of film. So
Holy shit.
wait, 300? No, it was my math is off. It was a 80-minute film, and we had about 240 minutes.
So you really didn't have much to cut from.
We really didn't have much to cut from. So that was another limitation, obviously. And with bad acting and with a bad director, that's your odds for success are not in your favor.
One of the things that Nick tells me is like, be willing to step back. And this is something that you're saying here too, which is kind of interesting because it's like, be willing to step back and let somebody better do the job.
Right. Look in the mirror and go. And, when I was 23 years old and made this film, when you're young like that, you think you're invincible and you think that like, you're stubborn and you think you're doing everything right. And sure, you're taking lessons from certain people, but you pretty much, don't want to admit when you're wrong because it's about the process of making the film. So years later, the only way you're going to get better is if you go, you know what, this is what I do really well.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I do really bad. And it's a matter of partnering up with the people who do the good stuff, who whatever you do bad, they do really good. And it's a matter of finding those people. And sometimes that's hard to admit, but in order to be a better filmmaker, you've got to look in the mirror because you're not going to be good at everything. You're going to be good at some things. And, one of the processes that I realized was I was good at the producing angle of it and the editing angle. And those were the two things that I kind of focused on later on in my career, which enabled me to do some of these commercials and produce some of these corporate videos that I do, fairly regularly.
Cine Hustle is written and produced by me, Vin Chandra. Our audio engineer and editor is Joshua Montmany. You can find us at youtube.com/Vin Chandra or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the subscribe button and tell a friend. Thanks for listening.